Welcome to Wider Lens, a podcast from Digital Transitions. In this series, we sit down with leaders from across the cultural heritage community to talk about the real work of digitization, what's happening today, what's coming next, and what it means for the people behind the projects. Each conversation explores heritage imaging in practice, the technical challenges, evolving standards, and complex collections. But we also focus our lens on the human side, the stories, lessons learned, and moments that don't always make it into the conference papers or imaging specifications. Whether you're working in a museum, library, archive, corporation, university, or research facility, Wider Lens is a space to share experience, spark discussion, and think critically about the future of cultural heritage digitization. Let's get started. All right, welcome back to the Wider Lens, the podcast from Digital Transitions, where we explore technology, workflows, and people behind cultural heritage digitization. I'm your host, Patrick McDonough, the head of marketing for DT. This is a special Inside DT edition of the Wider Lens. Instead of a full-length conversation with a guest from our heritage community, we're focusing our lens on the expertise inside Digital Transitions itself. These Inside DT shows introduce some of the people behind the work, sharing a bit about their background, the kinds of problems they solve, and some of the interesting stories that come from working in this rich and fascinating world. Today, I'm joined by Ben Cort, DT's Technical Services Manager. Ben spent more than a decade working in the professional imaging and cultural heritage field. He began his career at the Portland Art Museum, helping build their in-house imaging program, which grew from a volunteer effort into a core part of the museum's operations. Since then, he's worked closely with top institutions across the industry, helping them implement and maintain high-end digitization programs. Ben, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I guess to start with, for the people listening that have not met you yet, what exactly is your role at DT?
Yeah, so hi, everybody. So my role as Technical Services Manager, I oversee the technical team and all of its functions. So I'm responsible for making sure that new clients getting onboarded receive purchases in a timely manner, responsible for making the consistent curriculum that we train all of our clients on. I'm responsible for making sure that the staff that go on site, if it's not going to be me, are all teaching and training our clients the same thing. And then all of the sort of boring minutia behind the scenes to make that all possible.
Awesome. On that topic about the training, one thing that comes up a lot when I talk to people in our field is how hard it is to get people trained up on cultural heritage imaging, and how there aren't a lot of resources for that. So I'm curious how you got into this. How did you acquire the knowledge you have? How did you get into cultural heritage imaging? What's your background and what brought you here?
Yeah, so like you mentioned in the intro, I started out working at the Portland Art Museum. My degree is from RIT in professional photographic illustration. I focused on advertising, which the basic delineator there was I wanted to learn how to light in a studio rather than talk about fine art. At RIT was a thing called imaging systems, which effectively is a 2-year college course in what we all do now. Effectively color management from capture through to print. It was a lot of fun, but it introduced me into the more scientific side of imaging. Things like managing profiles, making sure that color looked good was relevant, but I had a lot of knowledge about input and output ICC profiles and XYZ transformation spaces, and none of that really made a lot of sense in taking photos of shoes.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you just mentioned for a kind of average commercial photographer probably sounds like gibberish. So.
Yeah, it was definitely a thing that I could say, like, oh, I know about this, but beyond that, it wasn't especially useful. So when I was getting ready to move out to Portland, I was put in touch with the woman that would become my boss, Maggie Hansen. And the museum had just gotten a state grant to start looking at what digital imaging would look like for the art museum. And we had produced a book, and it was basically very similar to the DT digitization guides of how to do a full color managed imaging through print workflow. And I brought that to the conversation and I said, this is what I've been doing. And Maggie looked at it and went, "Great, can you do this for us?" I was like, "Probably." And that was kind of it. I started out as a sort of volunteer and part-time employee at the Portland Art Museum. And it quickly became apparent that digital imaging of museum collection objects was not a position that should or could be filled by a volunteer. And so there was a hiring search. There was, we had done all the work, and I was offered a role with them full-time in 2016.
Nice.
And at that point, it was sort of off to the races.
You've worked on the inside building digitization programs in an institution. Now you're kind of on the other side, helping institutions solve problems. I guess one thing that I want to clarify, so when people hear like technical support, they think of like a help desk or something. But what is it you're actually doing, you and your team, day to day, in terms of helping the type of organization that you used to work at?
So there's certainly a little bit of that sort of help, my camera is making a weird sound or not turning on. And we do absolutely support that. But because the team has a lot of skills like I have, where, I've been doing this a long time, I work with folks that have been doing this a long time, we're really able to assist clients and, folks that call in with much harder to answer questions. It's a lot of, oh, we've gotten a grant project and we need help developing the workflow, or we've got this esoteric process that we need some help with, or, a lot of what we do with the webinars are born out of client questions, right? Things that, I've got film, I don't know what to do with it. I've got this print, I don't know what to do with it. It's a lot of workflow requests rather than strictly help, my thing is broken.
Yeah, curious on what the split is between like helping install new systems, helping, kind of set up facilities, helping set up new processes versus actual problem solving and troubleshooting. Like how what do you think the percentage of your time is split, or for the whole team, I should say?
I would say for the whole team, it's probably 60-40. By nature, we do end up resolving a lot of technical problems, but I would say 40% of our time is spent helping folks either set up or refine their policies and the way that their labs run.
Yeah, I know it, and most of our audience can relate to this. There's always new challenges and, material that doesn't fit the template of, just falls outside of normal digitization workflows or practices. But could you describe like what a typical day for you looks like?
Oh, a typical day. There's never a typical day.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess I would say, I've got two modalities of day, right? I've got a day in my office where it's a lot of checking in on the team, making sure that if there's questions that they're not able to answer, that I can direct them to the right spot. If there's questions that I can't answer, that I'm asking the right folks, spending a lot of time digging through old resources, updating them, making sure that our internal documentation is up to spec. I would say a big part of what I do on a regular basis is working with our sales team to make sure that, they'll come to me with, hey, this prospect has a question about XYZ. I'm thinking about offering this solution. What do you think about that? And we'll have a conversation in that vein.
Yeah, I think a lot of people maybe aren't aware that DT's technical team is not just sort of post-sales support, but really part of the consultative process of helping our clients understand what it is they need and, how to fit their particular solution or digitization department or program, whatever that is. And, our technical team is a big part of that and helping guide those sales.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, by the time we are on site, which would be the second modality of a day for me, we will have spoken with that client off and on for quite a while. I always think of an install day as like the end of a really exciting process. And it's like, all right, cool. Like we've done all this work. Here's the guy on site to do the actual project.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be the second thing that, a typical day, because I do spend a fair amount of time on site working with new clients, getting them set up. But that is always really fun. And I do hold those days with a lot of, I don't want to sound corny, but it's a lot of joy in that, right? It's like, I do 20 installs a year or something like that. maybe a little bit less in the past couple of years, just because I have a team to help out with all of that stuff. But it really is like, this is the culmination of months or years of work on the part of the client. And so showing up and being like excited for that client to get up and running is a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's fair to take a lot of pride in that. Like you said, the communication has happened quite a bit. There's a lot of touch points in helping, not just find the equipment, but like solving problems and figuring out the best way to implement it. So the satisfaction and like, okay, here's the thing we've been talking about. Now we're actually going to build it and set it up and help the client. Because at that point, the client pretty well. They're friends as much as clients, and helping them get started about something they're excited to do. It's got to be a good feeling. And that kind of brings me to the next topic. I think focusing on so much of what you do is problem solving. Like you mentioned, it's rare that an install is the same as the previous install. There's always little differences and little things you got to figure out. So I want to talk about your kind of view on problem solving, and how does looking at the micro view and dwelling on like the small thing compared to like, okay, stepping back and looking at the macro view, and how does that help in your problem solving?
Yeah, I definitely find that it's fairly common that the overall problem that we run into is caused by a step that we clicked right by or ran through. The joke problem of, well, did you turn it off and back on? There's a reason we always ask that. As far as times I can think of where we've gone really deep and the problem was really basic, there was a case we had, I think a couple of years ago at this point, where we were communicating with the client via email. They were having a problem launching the Capture One software. It would never launch. And the description that we got was, the software just keeps crashing on me. It won't open. I open it and then it just goes away and I don't know what's going on. And so we dug in and we're deleting folders and we're reinstalling software, and it's not doing what we expect it to do. And finally we were sort of like, oh, well, let's look at wiping out the OS and restarting from scratch, which is a pretty severe thing to do. Anybody listening to this that works in an institutional IT department is cringing and going, why is that where we got to? And we were chasing a rabbit and we're going all the way down the rabbit hole. And finally someone thought, hey, let's just really quick grab a screenshot of the last thing they see before the software crashes.
Mm-hmm.
And we got that back, and it was the login screen where you had to basically license the software. And so it was in retrospect, a rather humorous mistake that we'd overlooked, where of course we've licensed and installed the software. Of course the software is activated, right? Like step one, install software. Step two, activate it. And it was one of those things where you go, oh, duh, of course that's what it is. Yeah. But, we're so eager sometimes to dive in and assume that a challenge is really, really, really complex, and it's really not. Yeah. But a fun experience that I've had, my wife and I travel around a little bit, and we were in Japan a few years ago, taking a train from this little small town back into Tokyo to get our flight home. And we get on the train and we sit down, we've got our bags all organized. We're ready for sort of a nice scenic train ride through the mountains. And a British couple hops on the train, and they sort of are looking at their tickets, and they come over to us and they go, "You're in our seats." And I go, "No, my ticket says I'm in the right spot, and these are our seats." And we sort of had this back and forth a little bit, and it was getting a little bit testy. We're all a little bit at the end of our trips, and so you've got that end of trip energy where you're kind of tired and not thinking real clearly. And so we're like, all right, we're looking at tickets and we're trying to figure out like, oh, is it the right day? Is it the right train car? Like what? Bypassing the thing of, well, they don't sell the same seat twice, so this isn't the problem. And the train starts going, and the train conductor is like trying to like mediate. And then this other person comes over and says, "Let me see your tickets." And so I give this person my tickets, and the British couple give them their tickets. And he looks at the British couple and he goes, "You're on the wrong train." And so they had the same seats in the same car for the train going the other direction.
Oof.
I hold that as an experience in pretty high regard, where I'm like, if we had stepped back and started at like the very, very like macro level, right? The overall view of the scene might have been able to get those folks on the right train out of there. So I find myself a lot of times just having to lift my view out of what I expect to be the problem and take a much larger view and establish what's going on here. What are the root causes? And so I try to project that to the team where it's like, if you skip by something really basic, you suddenly can't rule out stuff the way you think you can.
Yeah. And, I've definitely been on the end of that, getting technical support in the end, have you made sure it's plugged in? And it's like, well, yeah, of course I have. And then you're like, it's like, oh, wait, actually I didn't. I just assumed that it was. And I've wasted 10 minutes trying to figure out why something isn't working. And it was the obvious thing. So, yeah, although it can seem silly to step through those simple things, but the most basic assumptions, if you don't check them, can lead to way more extra work and stress.
For the folks listening, a big thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about is how do we make sure that the support and the service and the information we provide is approachable. And when I'm on site with folks, harping on the idea that no problem is too insignificant to reach out to us about.
Yeah.
Like very simple problems are things that we can figure out quickly, but might be a real challenge for you. Or, at worst, it's the easiest part of my team's day. Right? Reminding a client to unplug and replug a USB cable that resolves a problem that they've been stressed out about for a couple hours. That's great, right? That 5 minutes of our time solves a headache for somebody. That's great. I love that. Worst case, it's easy for us and you move on with your day. So,
we talk about improvisation. I'm curious, everyone I've talked to, like at all of our clients, digitization facilities, there's always, like I mentioned, like material collections that are sort of outside the box, different than normal. But what's your favorite sort of MacGyver tool or solution to whether it's setting up a system or digitizing a particular piece of material that was kind of weird or esoteric? Like, what's the favorite that you've seen so far?
I think one of the things that I was most proud of working at the art museum, we were asked for I think it was the 100th year, the 125th anniversary gala. The art museum had a Brancusi sculpture, one of his Muse series pieces, and it was gold gilt Brancusi face. If you aren't familiar with his work, it's worth taking a Google of it. Basically, it's a chromed mirror, which is a whole challenge to photograph, and anybody in the audience who's a studio photographer would know sort of immediately that the challenge is posed by a completely chrome sphere. And at the time, my photo studio at the museum was a retrofitted art intake space with not a single planar wall. The ceiling was all ripped out HVAC. It was really a challenging space to work. So making this chrome ball of a sculpture present itself was a lot. It was 3 days of work with sheets of plexiglass that I stole from the prep shop and drilled holes in and mounted on various stands. Quite a bit of work with rolls of Westcott diffusion to make that all look like something. And at the end of the day, it was an image that I was really, really proud of. It got used on the invitation for that event. It got used on a handful of different things. And it was a really strong moment. But if you looked at what went into making that image work, it was an absolute nightmare of stuff.
Yeah, the reflective stuff. And for our listeners that aren't familiar, so Brancusi, it's spelled Brancusi, and I definitely recommend checking it out and seeing some of the stuff. I'm looking at this gold. Honestly, at a glance, it kind of reminds me of like an owl or something, sort of similarly shaped, sort of owlish figurehead.
Yeah, it's 1920s contemporary sculpting. It was a real joy to get to work with. That's probably the thing that I miss the most about working at DT is getting to spend a lot of time with hands-on with these art objects. I always joke with folks I'm doing installs with. I say, if you want tech support faster, send me a photo of nice art. If you lead a project with, I'm working on this really gorgeous painting and blah, blah, blah. And, well, I don't know what's going on. Here's a photo of a test target. It's like, no, I want to see the painting. Show me the thing you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely one of the things I enjoy about DT. I remember one of the stories I tell my friends all the time. We were doing a project with the Smithsonian. We were in the Natural History Museum, and I just asked our contact there, where the restrooms were, and walked down this long hallway and around a corner. And I passed by this lab, and it's an actual paleontology lab. And there's a big dinosaur skull just sitting on the counter, which is a wild, surreal thing to see. And there's an actual paleontologist wearing a white lab coat, dusting away at this skull. So I poked my head in and just asked, hey, can I take a picture of that? And she was super friendly. She invited me in. She spent like 15 or 20 minutes explaining what she was doing. And I mean, you don't have access to that in normal life. So working at DT, just having access to those kind of things is really, really exciting, really interesting. Ben, just to kind of wrap up our conversation here, I'm just going to fire a couple of quick questions to you, and then we'll sign off. But
Cool.
So, quick question: what's something you wish everyone listening knew that would save us all some pain, both the troubleshooting aspect and just like people in their day-to-day digitization world? What are some, you talk about like simple solutions, stepping back, things like that. What do you want to share with everybody?
Almost every problem with an auto column not being seen by Capture One can be resolved by unplugging the column's USB cable from the computer and plugging it back in. That's the one that's like, everywhere I go, I'm like, this is the solution. It's never to power cycle. It's never to do a big recalibration. Most of the time, if you can't get the column seen by Capture One, unplug that cable, plug it back in. We should be good to go. That's the big one that I spend a lot of time chatting with folks about.
Yeah, that's funny. I think most people kind of assume power it, unplug it completely, start it back up versus just the USB cable. I love that. Another quick one. What's something people would be most surprised about you and what you do outside of work?
Well, so in the winter, I'm a big skier. I do a lot of backcountry skiing, which means we walk up mountains instead of ride chairlifts and then ski down.
That's
And then in the summer, I race various race cars at tracks up here in the Pacific Northwest. So I have a 1977 Datsun 280Z that I've owned since 2012 and have put way, way, way too much time and effort into. And I just recently, with a friend of mine, picked up a 2010 Lotus Evora that we're going to be driving around in the Northwest this year with a new race series up here.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm slightly jealous of you doing that. I'm a big Formula One fan, big car geek, just in general. So yeah, amazing.
Yeah. If you ever want to have way too much of an in-depth conversation, ask me about either of those two things, skiing or race cars, and we'll just go off on a tangent forever. I try to keep those usually people find them exciting or incredibly boring. And so I try to not lead with either of those two things, because more often than not, we get off onto a long tangent and you can just watch the other person going like, all right, I want to be done with this conversation. So
nope. All right. Yeah. Our next conversation, we're just going to geek out on car stuff. I love that. All right. Well, Ben, thanks for joining me and sharing a look behind the scenes at the work you do and our technical team does. And thanks to everyone listening. This was the first episode in our Inside DT series, a little short conversation focused on the people and expertise behind digital transitions. If you enjoyed the podcast, we have more episodes coming up, both the Inside DT format, the shorter episodes we have here, and our longer full-length conversations with members of the digitization community and cultural heritage, people that come and share their insights, their stories, and those we actually film live, so you can join during the recording of the podcast and participate in the conversation in the Q&A and pose questions directly to our guests. Right now we have on the calendar Michelle Gohan of Utah Historical Society on April 22nd, and Ben was just out at Utah Historical Society helping them move facilities and was out there with Michelle, which is exciting. We have Maggie Wins of NHL's Washington Capitals on May 21st. Martina Hoffman of the Swiss National Library on July 2nd, and Sierra Arazo of the NASCAR Hall of Fame on August 27th. If you're interested in participating and joining any of those in our live recording of that, visit our website, digitaltransitions.com, and go to the events page, and you can register for free to join any of those. And of course, if you need more resources, articles, online training, and information about any digitization questions you might have, again, go to our website, digitaltransitions.com. And thanks, Ben. Appreciate the conversation.
Yep. No worries. That was fun.
Thanks for listening to Wider Lens, a podcast from Digital Transitions. We hope today's conversation offered practical insight into the evolving world of cultural heritage digitization, both the technical realities and the people behind the projects. If you have thoughts, questions, feedback, or ideas for future guests and topics, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out anytime at widerlens@digitaltransitions.com. And if this episode was valuable, please share with your cultural heritage friends, coworkers, and peers. Until next time, thanks for helping us focus a wider lens on the work that preserves our past and shapes its future.